Gloom is probably my favourite first-person shooter on the Amiga. When I first played it, it amazed me to enter a 3D world on the Amiga, which I never thought was possible. As someone who grew up with an Amiga as my main gaming platform for quite some time, I was a little behind the times when it came to some of the bigger hyped games that you'd get on PC or on consoles. As the mid-1990s hit, the hype was all about 3D gaming, and the game that really got everyone into moving around in 3D was Doom. These days, we'll call that genre first-person shooters, but back in the day, people just called them Doom clones. It didn't matter if you had Duke Nukem 3D, Hexen, or Quake. Even though the first significant game of the genre was Wolfenstein 3D, the game that got everyone's attention was Doom. So, at that stage, every first-person shooter was a Doom clone. But not for me. I had an Amiga, and Doom was nowhere in sight. Instead, I had Gloom, and everything was a Gloom clone. Created by developer Blackmagic Software, Gloom was a Doom clone, but as it was the game I played first, to me everything was a Gloom clone. There was a few first-person shooters released for the Amiga, but for me there were none better or more special than Gloom. And that includes when later down the line, I believe some people did get the likes of Quake or Doom up and running on the Amiga. In Gloom, you play as a badass Marine, and you go through around 21 levels, and these are split into 3 distinct looking chapters. In the first one, you're in something of a space station or a military base, and in this set of 7 levels, you'll be confronted by soldiers who look much like your character, but with army helmets on. It's brilliant that when you first shoot these, they will explode and you'll see their faces literally fly across the screen, and then either you'll just see them float away and disappear, or you can switch to have it on messy mode. And if you have it on messy mode, bits of the enemies that you kill will just be all over the place. And this is actually really useful, especially in some of the later maze-based levels, as this will give you some breadcrumbs of where you have already been. Now, these army dudes will shoot some orange balls of fire at you, or energy balls, or something like that. Like, the bullets are just big bouncing orange balls. Yeah. Then you meet the aggro skinheads, who are tougher, but they are topless, and they have no weapon. But they have no need for any weapon as long as they can walk straight into you. Later on in this chapter, you will meet the Ed 209 looking robot, Ed 209 being from RoboCop, if you don't get that one. There you go. And these are huge, and they will shoot these big purple, white, glowing balls of energy at you. They are tough to kill, and the fire rate is actually fairly insane. Now, as you go through each of the levels in each chapter, you'll have to find switches and teleport around the levels as you look for the exit teleporter. There are occasional environmental obstacles like rotating or sliding walls and blocks, which can do damage if they hit you. After you've got through the first chapter and dodged the Wheel of Death, you'll move on to the second chapter, which is the Gothic Tomb. Now, I'm not quite sure what the story or logic is of how you've been on a space station and then suddenly you're in a Gothic tomb, but you are, and this is probably my favourite of the enemies that you'll go against in the game. To begin with, you have the Gorn-looking green lizard men, who look like they were ripped straight from Star Trek. They walk around exactly like the aggro skinheads do in Chapter 1. Then there are ghosts which appear out of nowhere, and they shoot green laser balls at you. I think they actually have quite a cool, like, see-through effect going on here, which is actually pretty scary with the sound effects that they put with them. Now, when they shoot the green laser balls at you, you can shoot them, even though they're ghosts, but we won't worry about that, and they'll explode. Then you meet another kind of ghost thing which look exactly like the scary shadow ghosts from the movie Ghost. You know, the Patrick Swayze one. At the end of the chapter, you do get a cameo from some yellow demon thing from the final chapter before you get through all of the Gothic levels. Now, some of these levels do get a bit maze-like, which isn't the most fun. And for clarity, I've completed Gloom back in the day on the Amiga, and it took me a couple of years to achieve, as I always found the third chapter far too hard. The second time I beat it was on PC about 10 years ago, and it was at this point I discovered the game would allow you to strafe, which when I played it originally on my Mega Drive controller plugged into my Amiga, I had no idea was possible, and it certainly makes playing the game a lot easier. Just imagine not being able to sidestep in a first-person shooter. Insane. Playing today for the purposes of this review, I am playing it strangely on an Analogue Pocket with an Amiga core. It works pretty well, and I've also played it about a year ago on the A500 Mini. For the ease of capturing footage, I switched on an infinite energy cheat, which meant I could breeze through all of the chapters and explore and show you the different areas of the game. I'm also recording this, so I will share the full gameplay footage as a long play so you can see where to go and what to do without the stress of dying every 2 minutes in the third chapter. So yeah, a little bit cheaty, but I get to show you the whole game. Speaking of which, the third chapter is just called Hell, and whilst the first chapter was like a futuristic spaceship or space base, the second one was all wooden panels and cult-like symbols, the third is just the fiery pits of hell itself. You get new enemy types, which is a floating head that draws you in close, literally just like sucking you in towards it, and so you just have to pull backwards on the controller not to walk into its path. Eventually you'll meet a quite tall demon, which I could never quite see it close enough just as I was running through the levels, but I guess it may be a version of the demon you see on the title screen, which is a really cool piece of artwork. Now, if the two aren't the same, it would mean that you never meet the title screen demon in the game, which would be a real shame, so I'm just going to assume it is. The last few levels are more relentless in enemies that they throw at you rather than as mazy as the Gothic ones, and you do face off with a final boss, which is a multi-headed green dragon. And they literally put puns into the titles like, this is going to drag on, or something like that, I forget. Now, this dragon will run at you super fast. It's a slightly strange final boss, as why is a green dragon the final boss in hell? Surely, shouldn't it be the devil? Like, the title screen character monster thing should have been the final boss, but anyway. This is cool as well. Now, other than a screen to show you two army dudes with bleach blonde hair who look like clones of each other celebrating and letting you know that you've completed the game, there is no ending to the story, but this is fairly typical of the time. Now, it's best to fight a lot of enemies in the game on the back foot. Whilst many won't appear until you're quite near them, when they do they'll just run straight towards you, and then if you just back up and keep blasting and rotate around a little bit, they're not super smart with their AI, and as long as you dodge their fire you'll be okay in most instances. And there is no in-game map, at least I'd be amazed if I suddenly discovered that there was one, and that does make things a little bit tricky on some of the maze-like levels. Now, unlike most first-person shooters of the era, you never see the character's hands and never see the weapon that you're firing. You just see bouncing balls and pick one up, and then it appears in the middle of the screen as you shoot it. You only see the projectile, you never see the gun. Now, this is a shame that they didn't figure out how showing the on-screen weapon was something that all of the other first-person shooters at the time would be doing, but they didn't have it in this game, and that's slightly unusual to go back to. But I think they did it perhaps for Gloom 3, if I remember correctly. Strangely, I believe I'm correct in saying that there is no Gloom 2, but there is Gloom Deluxe, which I think adds a bunch of stuff and is technically therefore Gloom 2. Now, as well as there being 3 or 4 types of ammo that you can pick up, which each time gets a bit more powerful but basically looks and does the same thing, you can also pick up health, which is represented by a baby bottle, and that is a bit odd. Yeah, I don't know why they did that. You can also find a Defender-like arcade game which you can play, and this is another bizarre inclusion. It's kind of like they figured, can we put a game within the game? And they did. And it is presented on a giant CRT TV. You can pick up items that mean that the bullets can bounce around, which is cool. It means you can fire around corners if you have bouncy bullets. You can also find an invisibility item and an item that lets you see enemies through walls. As lacking as the game is by today's standard, I do think most things that are part of the game are inventive, and it is actually quite a fun game to play. Look, maybe I'm seeing it through rose-tinted glasses, as it was my first-person shooter, but I think it holds up for an Amiga shooter of the era. I certainly prefer it to the likes of Alien Breed 3D, which I couldn't get into until years later. Now, when you're playing this, it will come up as small on the screen, but there are options to make it fill the screen and have it on like full screen mode. The game is quite challenging, but I'm sure if you get into it, you could play through pretty quick. My infinite energy run was just over an hour, but that was also I have no idea where I'm going in the maze levels run, because it's quite a few years since I played it. I mean, I played it somewhat on the A500 Mini, but not the later levels, so I was completely lost in the mazes. So I'm sure a speed run could probably be done in half an hour if you were an expert of where to go and really had your maneuvering down, regardless if you had the infinite energy run on. One thing I will say as a tip, if you want to get better performance out of like the Amiga that you're playing it on, or the emulator I guess nowadays, you can switch the ceiling and the ground off, and this does actually make it a little bit easier just to see where you're going with literally just the walls about. Now, that's a fun way to just tinker with it and see what results you can get out of it. But I'm going to wrap up this review here. I think it's a pretty good game, and it's one that's definitely worth playing. I'm going to have another couple of videos on the theme of Gloom in the coming days, and one of them I think is super fun and it will surprise a lot of people. Now, if you haven't done so already, please take a moment to smash that subscribe button here on youtube.com/Geek Battle Gaming. Leave us a comment, leave us a thumbs up, and by all means tell people to check out the channel, just because there's so much retro and modern retro gaming stuff that we're doing on the channel, and we're moving more and more into documentaries and other cool stuff. Oh, and you can also check out the article version of this video on www.xstreamed.tv. So until next time, stay safe, always stay extremed, and ciao for now. Boom, and we're off the air.